Hello, glad to see you on the channel. Subscribe, give a like, and don't forget to leave a comment. Enjoy watching.
The moment Trent leaned back in his chair and said, "We're going in a new direction," I knew I was done. Not just from the company. Done being naive, done playing the loyal soldier, done pretending that corporate America still gave a damn about anything except quarterly returns and who looked better in a blazer on investor Zoom calls. Trent always had a thing for drama, and he didn't disappoint. He folded his hands like some Bond villain in a Patagonia vest and hit me with the line I now hear in my sleep. "You're being phased out. No hard feelings." Phased out. Like a Windows update. Like they were just replacing the batteries in the remote and I happened to be the dying pair. No discussion, no performance review, not even a whisper of this during our weekly one-on-ones. Just a neat little bullet point agenda with my name on it and a pre-printed severance packet with a sad-looking graphic of a handshake on the cover. And I'll tell you what made it worse. Trent wasn't even good at this kind of thing. He tried to soften the blow with startup speak garbage like, "We value what you've brought to the culture," and "This is about positioning the brand for the next stage." I wanted to ask him if he practiced that crap in the mirror, maybe in front of his Peloton. I didn't say much, didn't give him the satisfaction of a scene. I just nodded like I was trying to understand quantum physics and tucked the envelope under my arm. He stood to shake my hand and hit me with that same fake warm smile he probably uses on VCs and interns he's about to underpay. The handshake was firm. Too firm. Like he was trying to convince himself he was doing the right thing. Here's the kicker. I wasn't even angry. Not then. It felt surreal, like I was watching a TV show where the guy who built the rocket gets told he's too old to be on the launch team. I'd been with that company for 7 years, since it was 3 guys and a dog working out of a rented co-working space above a vape shop. I named the damn thing, came up with the brand voice. I was the one who figured out how to pitch our whole social infrastructure revolution to a bunch of investors who didn't know a Slack channel from a sewer pipe. And now, just like that, I was phased out. I walked back to my desk like a ghost. No one looked up. Not really. One of the engineers nodded at me the way you might nod at someone in a hospital hallway. HR must have already hit send on the announcement because people were studiously pretending they didn't know. My inbox had gone quiet. I sat down, stared at my screensaver for a moment, then clicked into the project folder I'd spent the last month polishing. A pitch deck, one that Trent himself had called Mission Critical. Funny how that mission no longer included me. I backed it up. Nothing illegal. Not yet, anyway. Just a little insurance policy. Something to remind myself that I wasn't crazy. That I'd actually built something valuable. The company laptop was still mine for another 10 days, and I knew exactly how to wipe the trail clean when the time came. What Trent didn't know, what made this whole thing a spectacular miscalculation, is that I wasn't some clueless lifer too shell-shocked to see what was really going on. I'd seen the signs for months, the weekly one-on-ones that got shorter, the junior marketing hires I was suddenly being told to mentor even though they were being paid more than I ever was, the way every strategy meeting suddenly ended without me being asked for input, like I was an old encyclopedia in a room full of TikTok algorithms. And the biggest red flag? A new, young VP of marketing brought on with fresh ideas who started quoting back my own phrases during presentations. Lines I'd written, decks I'd built, but somehow they sounded newer, hipper, coming from someone with tighter jeans and a podcast. Trent's version of loyalty was simple. He loved you until you cost more than your replacement. That's it. Doesn't matter how many late nights you pulled or how many weekends you sacrificed so the pitch could be ready by Monday. He liked to pretend we were family, said it often, usually while holding a bourbon at company offsites. But when push came to shove, I was just overhead. I packed up what little personal stuff I had, my favorite pen, a moleskin notebook full of scribbles that never made it to the whiteboard, and a mug my daughter had made in a ceramics class. People still didn't make eye contact. I gave them a smile anyway. Not out of politeness, out of defiance. You ever have that moment, walking out of a building for the last time, knowing full well that you left it better than you found it, and they still shoved you out the side door? It messes with your head, makes you question your instincts, your loyalty, even your sanity. But then I remembered something. That pitch deck. The one I had quietly exported to my personal drive before the meeting. The one I'd slaved over for 3 months while Trent was out golfing with Series B investors and keynote flirting at startup summits. It wasn't just slides, it was the whole damn strategy, messaging pillars, roadmaps, competitive breakdowns, data visualizations. We paid consultants 20 grand to produce, and suddenly the humiliation I felt started to give way to something else, something colder, sharper, resolve. Because I wasn't going to beg for my job. I wasn't going to leave a nasty Glassdoor review or post some sad farewell message on LinkedIn hoping for sympathy claps. I was going to do what Trent never thought I was capable of. I was going to make him regret forgetting who built his ladder. Be honest, have you ever dreamed of getting revenge on a manager like that? The first time I met Jason, my so-called successor, he was wearing a blazer over a t-shirt that said, "Branding is my superpower." I remember thinking two things at once. First, that someone in HR had a twisted sense of humor, and second, that the kid probably had no idea what the hell he'd just walked into. He was fresh out of some West Coast incubator, the kind of guy who talked about storytelling ecosystems and peppered every third sentence with words like synergy and disruption, even when we were just discussing where to order lunch. I don't blame him for being green. I blame Trent for acting like he wasn't. I was still on payroll, technically. My last 2 weeks were framed as a knowledge transfer period, which in startup speak meant please spend your final days here training the guy who's taking your job so we don't crash and burn. They called it smooth succession planning. I called it being forced to hand over the keys to a car I built just so I could watch the new driver immediately start fiddling with the radio like he'd always owned it. Jason asked a lot of questions, some good, most not. He talked fast, used phrases like, "let's 10x this," and kept referring to my campaigns as legacy touch points, with a kind of polite condescension that made me want to jab a pen into my own thigh. He wasn't mean. He was just clueless, the way a golden retriever is clueless about why it shouldn't sit on your laptop, except this golden retriever was being paid a six-figure salary to repackage my work with a fresh coat of LinkedIn polish and pitch it as next-gen thought leadership. What really got to me, though, was how familiar everything started to sound coming out of his mouth. He was using my metaphors, my taglines, the campaign structure I'd personally developed during that miserable quarter when our burn rate was sky high and Trent was threatening to gut the entire department if we didn't double engagement by Q3. Jason repeated my words like he'd invented them in his sleep, and worse, everyone around him nodded like he had. The first week, I bit my tongue. I told myself it wasn't his fault. He'd clearly been handed my decks, my documents, my notes. Of course, he sounded like me. He'd been trained too. But by the end of that second Monday, when he started presenting one of my ideas in the weekly all hands and called it his vision for the future of brand outreach, I felt something crack deep in my gut, something that had been holding together the last shreds of my professional dignity. Trent didn't even look at me during that meeting, just stared down at his laptop, probably messaging someone about a lunch reservation, or maybe even congratulating himself on what a seamless transition this was turning out to be. That was the moment I realized none of this was by accident. I wasn't just being replaced, I was being erased. The project management tools started locking me out. First it was Trello, then Notion, then our internal analytics dashboard. No one said anything, but I could see what was happening. I was being quietly wiped from the infrastructure. My name was removed from the About Us page before my official end date. My Slack access went from full functionality to read-only, then finally to account not found. The farewell messages I thought I might get from my team? Crickets. Maybe a couple of side texts from people too nervous to say anything in public. I don't blame them. Nobody wants to get caught standing next to the guy who's already halfway out the door. One night during that second week, I stayed late. Not to finish anything important, just to sit in the conference room and think. The office was mostly dark, except for a few glowing monitors and the distant hum of the cleaning crew. I watched Jason through the glass wall of his new office, fiddling with a slide deck I'd clearly built from scratch. He had changed the font, added a new color scheme, but the bones were mine. Every insight, every timeline, every market angle, I recognized it all. It was like watching someone repaint your house and pretend they'd designed the foundation. That night, I went home and opened the private folder I'd started collecting. Nothing criminal, mind you, just copies of every pitch, every campaign summary, every invoice, every performance stat that had come out of my department for the last 3 years. I wasn't going to delete anything. I wasn't going to cause chaos, but I needed a record. Something to prove that I'd actually been there, that I'd mattered, that I wasn't just another ghost in the machine, overwritten by a younger model with a better Instagram feed and a Stanford sweatshirt. My wife noticed I was drinking more wine than usual. She didn't say anything, but she started making my favorite dinners without asking. My daughter, who's 13 and smarter than both of us combined, asked if I was going to be home more now. I said yes, and she smiled, but not like she was happy. More like she knew something had broken and didn't want to poke at it just yet. The company sent out an internal newsletter at the end of that week. It included a section titled Exciting Leadership Changes. Jason's name was there, listed under a bolded heading that said Director of Brand Strategy, with a cheerful blurb about his fresh perspective and data-driven storytelling instincts. At the very bottom, in smaller font, was a line about me. It said, "We wish Alex the best in his future endeavors and thank him for his many contributions." No mention of what I built, no mention of how long I'd been there. Just a polite shove out the back door, wrapped in a smile and a signature from HR. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, running through every meeting, every campaign, every strategy session I'd ever led. I realized I could either let them write me out of the story, or I could write myself back in. Not out of spite, not even out of pride, out of principle. Because if they were going to steal my work and pretend I never existed, then I was going to remind them, quietly, carefully, and with precision, that the story wasn't over. Not yet. The email came at exactly 9:03 a.m. on a Thursday morning. Subject line, "Farewell, Alex." And I knew right then that whatever small part of me had still hoped for a shred of dignity was finally dead. The message was from someone in HR I'd never met in person, a woman named Tessa, who signed her emails warmly, even when they were about cutting your health benefits. It was a template, of course, generic, hollow, the kind of thing that probably got copy-pasted 20 times a quarter. After 7 years of incredible work, it said, Alex will be leaving us to pursue new adventures. We are grateful for his contributions to our journey, and we wish him all the best. There was even a small, embedded GIF of fireworks at the bottom. I stared at it for a long time, numb, not because I expected more, but because it hit me just how little they thought this moment mattered. The people who mattered didn't respond, not right away. A few brave souls dropped in with thumbs-up emojis and boilerplate replies like, "Best of luck," or "Thanks for everything, Alex." But most just ignored it, probably out of fear that engaging with the departing guy might taint their own stability. You could feel the culture shift in moments like that. One day, you're leading meetings, setting strategies, guiding the tone of the brand, and the next, you're a risk, a reminder, a relic better left unacknowledged. People didn't want to know what happened. They just wanted to make sure it didn't happen to them. Later that day, I found myself alone in the office kitchen, nursing a cup of burnt coffee I didn't really want, when I noticed someone had taken my name off the team bulletin board. It had been replaced with a quote from Jason, something motivational about building for the future with fearless authenticity. I stood there, staring at that corkboard, remembering how just last month I'd helped one of the designers fix the damn thing when it collapsed under its own thumbtacks. That was always my role, fix the things no one else wanted to admit were broken. Not glamorous, not visible to the VCs, but essential. And now I was being wiped out of the ecosystem one post-it note at a time. I went back to my desk and sat down, Not because I had anything left to do, but because I needed the illusion of routine for a few more hours. I opened a folder buried deep in my personal cloud drive, one I hadn't touched in years. It was called Old Proposals. Inside were PDF after PDF of strategy docs, marketing roadmaps, UX briefs, and annotated slide decks going back to our seed round. As I scrolled, a strange sense of calm settled in. I hadn't just worked there, I'd built there. My fingerprints were on every stage of that company's ascent, from our chaotic MVP to the polished facade Trent now sold on panels as intentional brand storytelling. Every idea that ever landed, every pivot that ever stuck, every campaign that brought in measurable ROI had passed through my hands first. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was something else entirely. That night, I poured a whiskey, no ice, no distractions, and sat down at my desk at home. I pulled up the pitch deck we'd prepared for Series C. It was flawless. Tight design, clear metrics, aggressive but plausible projections. I knew it inside out because I'd written every word of it. I knew the narrative structure, the pain points, the market differentiators. I knew the unspoken gaps, the things we exaggerated, the metrics we padded, the risks we downplayed with strategic optimism. And most importantly, I knew exactly how to use it. The plan didn't come to me all at once. It wasn't some Hollywood montage where I slammed my fist on the table and started plotting revenge. It was slower than that, more clinical. I didn't want to burn the place down. I just wanted to remind them what they'd thrown away. I wanted to place a single, precise wedge in the foundation and watch how far the cracks spread. Not out of pettiness, not even out of ego, but because Trent had made a choice. Not just to remove me, but to pretend I never mattered. And that erasure, that complete dismissal of my value, wasn't something I could let stand. I reached out to an old friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, who now happened to be the VP of Strategic Growth at a direct competitor, a company we'd publicly mocked in our internal memos and privately feared during our market reviews. We met for coffee the next afternoon at a place we used to frequent during our agency days. I wore the same button-down I'd worn to my very first investor pitch for Trent's company, not for sentimentality, but for symmetry. My friend looked older, wiser, and a little tired. We made small talk, caught up on life, pretended this was just a casual meetup between old colleagues. But when I opened my bag and slid the deck across the table, everything changed. I didn't say much, just told him to read it. Told him I wasn't looking for a job, at least not in the traditional sense. I was offering something else, something sharper. A mirror, a map, a roadmap to exactly where Trent's company was going and exactly how to get there faster. He looked through it in silence for a while, occasionally raising an eyebrow or chuckling at how familiar it all looked. When he finally looked up, there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen in a while. Recognition, not just of the material, but of me, of my value, of what I still had to offer. I left the meeting without a handshake, without a deal, without any promise at all. But I didn't need one. I'd done what I came to do. I had stepped out of the narrative Trent tried to write for me, and I'd started writing my own, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace, because I wasn't just going to disappear, I was going to be the reason they remembered who I was. There's a certain quiet that settles in just before you do something you know you can't undo. It's not fear, exactly, and it's not quite adrenaline either. It's like standing on the edge of a rooftop and realizing the fall isn't what scares you. It's the fact that you could jump if you wanted to. That's how I felt the morning I walked into that meeting. I'd dressed deliberately for it. No startup casual hoodie, no sneakers with a blazer. Just a tailored navy jacket, pressed shirt, and the same leather messenger bag I had carried since my agency days, the one that now held a fully loaded copy of the very deck Trent's company was planning to use to convince investors they were the next big thing. The meeting was at a boutique hotel downtown, modern, minimalist, the kind of place that served cocktails with rosemary sprigs and charged $26 for a grilled cheese. I arrived 15 minutes early and sat in the lounge, sipping a black coffee so bitter it could have been brewed out of my last 3 months. Across from me, pacing near the bar, was the man I'd come to meet, David Lawrence, VP of Strategic Growth at ConX. If Trent was the golden boy of investor summits and TEDx panels, David was his opposite in every way. Quiet, methodical, a legacy operator who'd never once called himself a visionary, but consistently turned underdogs into competitors. We hadn't seen each other in over 6 years, not since the agency where we both cut our teeth imploded under the weight of its own creative egos and billing errors. Back then, we'd bonded over long nights in a cramped pitch room, working on campaigns that barely kept the lights on. He'd gone corporate, I'd gone startup, and for a while, it seemed like we'd both landed where we were meant to, until we didn't. He saw me, gave a subtle nod, and we both sat without ceremony. No awkward hugs, no long time, no see. Just two men who'd survived the game long enough to know how fast the rules change. "I hear you've had an interesting quarter," he said, not unkindly, but with that sharp undertone people in his position are paid to use. I didn't rise to it. "You could say that," I replied, placing the bag gently on the table between us. "But I didn't come here for sympathy." He didn't laugh, but he smiled the way people do when they already know they're about to hear something they'll remember. I reached into the bag and pulled out the deck. Not just the polished, front-facing version, but the internal build-out, the one with all the footnotes, internal cost breakdowns, timeline overlays, risk assessments, and vendor agreements. This wasn't some half-baked leak or disgruntled employee tantrum. This was a blueprint. A strategy map from the inside out, built with my hands, shaped by my insights, and now being used by people who didn't even have the decency to acknowledge my name in a farewell email. I slid the binder across the table without a word. David opened it, turned a few pages, and paused at one of the competitor analysis slides I knew would catch his attention. His lips twitched, almost imperceptibly. "This is recent," he said. Not a question. 3 weeks old, I answered. "They're using it to angle for pre-IPO placement, probably hoping to inflate valuation before Q4. He kept flipping, slowly, deliberately, occasionally stopping to take a picture with his phone, which he didn't bother to hide. I knew this part wasn't about due diligence. It was theater. He wanted me to know that he was taking it seriously, and he wanted to show he understood what I was offering without actually putting anything in writing. We were both veterans of the same system. We knew how to communicate with plausible deniability. "I assume you're aware of the legal implications," he said eventually, his voice low. "I didn't sign a non-compete," I said, "and the deck was created on my system, under my structure, using language I developed before they were even tracking engagement rates. If they want to argue proprietary rights over ideas they stopped paying me for the minute they phased me out, let them try." He nodded, slowly, like a poker player deciding whether to call the bluff or raise the stakes. "What do you want?" he asked. And this was the moment, the real moment. Not when I packed the deck, not when I stepped into the hotel, not even when I handed over the documents. This was the jump. "I want a contract," I said. "I don't need a title, and I'm not looking for a desk, but I want to work with a team that knows what I bring to the table and doesn't shove me out the door the second someone younger learns how to sound confident in front of a whiteboard." He nodded again. Still no promises, still no expressions of loyalty. That wasn't what this was. This was business. This was war with invoices. When I stood to leave, he shook my hand, a firm, quiet shake, the kind men like us reserve for deals that don't need signatures. I walked out into the afternoon sun with the same calm I'd felt that morning. There was no music swelling, no cinematic triumph, no slow-motion montage of vindication. Just me, walking down the street with my hands in my pockets, knowing full well that I had just changed the course of Trent's company without raising my voice or firing a shot. In the days that followed, I didn't check in. I didn't text David or ask for updates. I knew how these things worked. If the information was valuable, I'd hear from him. If it wasn't, I'd still sleep just fine, knowing I hadn't gone down quietly. Revenge, it turned out, didn't have to be loud. Sometimes it was just the sound of silence at the exact moment your absence started costing someone else real money. 3 months passed like they always do when you're no longer checking Slack notifications every 7 minutes or living under the flickering fluorescent lights of some rented, open concept warehouse space. They dressed up with succulents and exposed brick to make everyone feel like they were building something important. I had expected to feel restless, maybe even lost, but instead I found myself sleeping better, eating real meals with my family, and rediscovering the absurd joy of taking a walk in the middle of the day without needing to answer to a productivity app. The weight that had sat on my shoulders for years, the constant pressure to justify my seat at the table, the need to keep proving my value to a younger, louder room, had slipped off so quietly that I didn't even realize it was gone until my wife looked at me one morning over coffee and said with cautious surprise, "You don't look tired anymore." What she didn't know, what I hadn't told her yet, was that Connex had followed up 2 weeks after our meeting at the hotel, not with a formal offer in the traditional sense, but with something even more useful: access. They brought me in as a consultant under a third-party agency shell, one of those vague, flexible arrangements where my name wouldn't appear on any org charts, and my deliverables were technically just market insights, even though everyone in the room knew that what I was really doing was preparing them to launch a direct assault on Trent's turf. It wasn't about revenge anymore, not exactly. It was about balance, about restoring the scales that had been tipped so far in favor of charisma and spin that people like me, builders, thinkers, the ones who did the quiet work in the background, were getting swept off the board like we were part of last season's budget cuts. I didn't track Trent's company obsessively. I didn't need to. The signs started appearing without me looking. First came the whisper that they had delayed their IPO roadmap, citing market conditions, which I found particularly amusing considering how aggressively they'd been pitching their first mover advantage just 6 weeks earlier. Then came the article in Tech Pulse speculating about internal shakeups, which quoted unnamed sources referencing unexpected challenges in go-to-market strategy and reduced investor confidence. I could have written the article myself, right down to the part where they praised the bold branding direction that, as I knew all too well, was now being mimicked by Connex in sharper, faster, more confident strokes. I never reached out to anyone at the old company. There was nothing left to say. Trent never called, never emailed, never sent some passive-aggressive LinkedIn message dripping in condescension. He had probably moved on in his own way, spinning whatever narrative he needed to in order to maintain his image, the resilient leader navigating turbulent waters with vision and fortitude. I imagine him standing in front of one of those startup conference audiences, sleeves rolled to his elbows, talking about the pivot and how adversity reveals character. It didn't matter. I wasn't doing this for his reaction. I was doing it because I knew how things really worked, and I was tired of pretending that people like me had to keep taking the high road just to be discarded the moment the market shifted. Connex, for their part, treated me with the kind of measured respect that only comes when people are both grateful and slightly afraid of how much you know. I didn't ask for credit, and they didn't try to flatter me. They gave me access to the right rooms, let me do the work, and, most importantly, they listened. Not performative listening, the kind where someone nods while already planning what to say next, but real, focused attention. It had been a long time since I'd felt that. One afternoon, I got a calendar invite from David Lawrence. No subject line, no context. Just a time and a Zoom link. When I logged in, it was just the two of us. No preamble, no small talk. He leaned in slightly and said, "Their last round didn't close. They're trying to restructure." I waited for a reaction in myself, something satisfying or gloating or even just validating, but instead I felt still. Not empty, not cold, just settled. I nodded, thanked him, and logged off. I had already won what I needed to win. The rest was just gravity doing its job. Some nights I still think about that farewell email, how small and impersonal it was, how it tried to compress 7 years of blood and grit into a cheery little send-off. And sometimes I think about Jason, the kid who replaced me, probably still pitching versions of my slides with slight tweaks and newer buzzwords, chasing relevance in a room that will one day spit him out too. I don't wish him harm. I actually hope he figures it out before it happens, but I won't lie and say I don't take a certain quiet satisfaction in knowing that, for once, the system got a taste of its own medicine. The truth is, I didn't need to destroy anyone. I just needed to be remembered. Not by the public, not by the tech blogs, but by the people who thought they could erase me without consequence. And they will, because every time they sit in a strategy meeting and someone says, "Didn't we already try that?" Or, "Where did that framework come from?" Or, "Who wrote this original deck again?" My name, the one they buried, will hang there in the silence like a ghost in the room. And that, for me, is enough.